Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining day 4 of Week Without Violence. Week Without Violence is part of a global movement with all YWCAs across the country and around the world to end violence against women and girls. At YWCA, we know that all violence is not acknowledged and responded to in the same way, and some victims go unrecognized altogether. That's why for more than 20 years, YWCA has set aside 1 week in October as Week Without Violence. Tonight, we're going to focus on violence against women and girls through human trafficking. Stop Human Trafficking will be presented by Taisha Blue of Perfectly Imperfect, and will be bringing awareness to the topic of human trafficking, identifying the different types of human trafficking, methods traffickers use to lure youth in, and how to protect yourself. Taisha Blue is the founder and CEO of Perfectly Imperfect, which was created in 2015. The primary focus is working with youth from 9 to 18, promoting the importance of self-esteem and self-love, as well as fostering interactions that allow decisions to achieve life goals. Taisha has published 4 books, a 4-series collection called the Self-Esteem We Plant Today. And one of them has a section on bullying and prevention, specifically for young men. Ms. Blue has traveled throughout the state during her career, speaking at schools from grade school through colleges. She has also spoken at businesses, and as a facilitator of Love 146 on the prevention of sex and child trafficking. Her most recent presentation was at the Henry Lee School for Forensic Science in New Haven, Connecticut. She currently holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Central Connecticut State University and is pursuing a master's degree in forensic science. Ms. Blue is an honoree recipient of 100 Women of Color Class of 2020. Please welcome Taisha Blue. Welcome, Taisha.
Hi, good evening. How are you, Terry? Thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to participate in tonight's presentation. I believe, human trafficking and sex trafficking, child trafficking, all of the above is not a normal conversation that, we would have at the dinner table or just time out with our friends, but it is a conversation that society needs to be made more aware of. And before I even go any further, there is a small 4-minute video that I do think is very powerful to watch regarding the victim's aspect of being trafficked.
He found me on social media.
She would force me to beg in the street.
My mother gave birth to me when she was 14 years old.
I've always had problems, as if I was born into problems.
I had to quit school early and go to work for my family to have money.
My dad chose drugs over us.
There's this awful feeling in your stomach when you know you're not wanted.
I already had friends working in a strip club. They introduced me to a trafficker.
I decided to run away. I might find love and care someplace else.
I couldn't believe how much I made in one night. I thought I could control what happened from there.
He'd take pictures of us. I thought what they were doing to me was okay.
I had my hair and nails done. I felt beautiful.
He gave my family a computer and phones. My friends didn't have those, so I felt proud.
I just didn't realize that the person I thought was helping me and keeping me protected, he was really my pimp.
I love her. I thought she loved me.
But then he started saying
rent's not free.
I was forced to work in a nail salon.
I was only 12 years old when I was first sold for sex.
Mama said, I'll be giving you to my American friend. I said okay. But when the time came, I tried to hide from him behind the cars in the parking lot.
I couldn't avoid the beatings. I begged to go home.
My hands were swollen from the work.
It hurt to walk.
I needed to do what he wanted because he paid for me.
People kept asking what was wrong. I kept making up answers.
I couldn't just tell my mom because she would have called the cops, and I didn't want that. She didn't know how these people act.
Then some people did call the police, but they would just come and then leave, and nothing would change.
And no one could help me. I thought my life would end there.
Someone called Love 146. I said I wasn't going to see them, but they kept showing up.
They knew what I needed.
The police was there and got us.
They brought me to Lab 146.
Talking to Love 146 was the first time I realized what was really happening to me.
I was given a light and a way out when I met you.
Now, I try to remember when I'm angry or sad that it's okay to cry.
But everything that happened before is starting to become a smaller part of my life because it's being replaced with good memories.
The Lab 146 worker is like a mom to me.
She showed me that I'm deserving of much more than this.
When everyone else just thought I was a bad kid, she listened.
I felt like it was my fault. But now I can explain to people how you tricked me.
The hardest part is knowing that they couldn't find him.
I imagined that he is just around the corner and he could shoot me.
Even if there are people who continue to harm children, there are more people who still can love children like us.
I am now living independently and I feel great.
Love 146 valued me. It was here that I became strong.
It was here that I learned how to be loved.
And how to love myself and other people.
I learned to stand on my own 2 feet.
I'm not just another statistic.
I'm not ready to give up.
I still have fight left in me.
I'm going to make it.
Okay. So I just wanted you guys to be able to see, how these youth, these young boys, these young children, these women took their trauma and used that as a strength to prevail to what happened to them. And I'll go into a little bit of how I got started before I actually start the PowerPoint with Love 146. So back in 2014, I worked for a juvenile detention center. So I was a juvenile detention worker, and we were not allowed to be trained in Love 146. Only the social workers at the time were able to take the training. And that was just something that I always, wanted to do. But unfortunately, the state wouldn't pay for it because we weren't social workers. So a year after I ended up leaving the juvenile detention center, I took the initiative and I found out when the next training was, and I paid for it. And I went to a 2-day training, and I became licensed as a facilitator for Love 146. The good thing about going as an individual is that, or as an entrepreneur, is that when you don't work for a business or organization and you go as just a single person, once you leave that job, that business, that organization, you're no longer certified, you're no longer licensed because you work for another organization. So being that I had Perfectly Imperfect, I got licensed as an organization and as an individual. So I can take my training anywhere in the state, in the country. It doesn't stay with the job. If I go somewhere and got certified somewhere else, I would have to leave that there. But I'm my own entity. So that's the good thing about doing that. So if anyone that's listening is interested in becoming licensed or certified, just know that through your business, you can become licensed as a business and as an individual. So no matter where you go, they can't take that from you. So that's just something that I wanted to share of how I even got started in Love 146. Love 146 is a grassroots organization that focuses on the prevention of sex trafficking with specifically children, women and children. Not to say that it doesn't happen to, young boys, but it's more prevalent, unfortunately, with women and children. And that's what we're going to be kind of discussing tonight. So human trafficking, it can happen to anyone, but some people obviously are more vulnerable because of certain significant risk factors, including relocation of an unknown area, substance abuse, mental health concerns, things of this nature. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a background of how I got started with Love 146. So, what is human and sex trafficking? So, human trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, coercion for the purpose of subjection to the involuntary servitude, debt, bondage, sex acts, sale of body organs, or slavery. Other definitions that involve using force is violence to control someone, direct or indirect use of violence or threats to control another, using lies to control someone, intentionally distorting the truth to get someone to surrender a legal right or give up something valuable, using threats to control someone, including violence. So force, fraud, and coercion, those three things have to exist in order for it, to be present. That indicates that the victim has not consented. So if it involves force, fraud, or coercion, it indicates that the victim has not consented. January is National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. I just thought that people should know that little blue heart is, a significant color and heart prevalent to January. January, is designated observance designed to educate the public about human trafficking and the role that they play in preventing and responding to human trafficking. Prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships are the 4 Ps essential to addressing trafficking holistically. So during COVID, I can confidently say I believe it probably affected the world. Whether people lost family members or you were affected directly, if you caught COVID, it was a very traumatic time for the world. But also it led to increased time on, the internet, because the world pretty much shut down, right? So children kind of didn't have a choice. If they wanted to go somewhere and they couldn't, all they had was, their phones, computers, games, and predators took advantage of that. So, as parents, there are things that we can prevent, and we sometimes tell ourselves, it couldn't be me, that couldn't be my child. But as I said earlier, it can happen to anyone. We could take our child's phone, we could take their gaming system, but our children still have to go into the world. They still have to go to school. They still have to have that face-to-face contact with their peers. So it's, it could happen, but being that they're just in the house, they have nothing else to do but watch TV and be on their phones. They were exposed more so during 2019, 2020 to predators. So more than 1.5 billion children and young people have been affected by the school closures. Many of the students, now are taking classes as well as socializing more online because of that. They were spending more time on virtual platforms, which led to sexual exploitation and grooming, as predators look, to exploit them. The lack of face-to-face contact with friends and partners, led to heightened risk-taking, such as sending sexualized images. They call it sexting. The kids call it sexting. while increased and unstructured time online may expose children to potentially harmful and violent content, as well as greater risk of cyberbullying. So there was one thing that I actually had a conversation with some children at one of the schools that I work at. They told me about a game called Roblox. I thought it was called Roadblocks, kind of ages me, but it's called Roblox. And I learned that predators were actually finding children through that game, inviting them out to the park, and being just sexually inappropriate with these kids by trying to lure them and ask them to meet them out in the park through this game. And for the most part, Roblox, the only disclaimer is that, are you over 12? And what child is going to say no? They really want to play the game. So that's one of the things I wanted to touch on, is that if your child has Roblox, just make sure you're paying attention to the chat rooms, because there are chat rooms in those games. Just make sure you're paying attention to things like that, because it's still happening. There's really not much that we could do except for, have them not play the game, or just be around them when they're actually playing that game. But predators are actually using Roblox. That's another stream of getting to the kids, is through these video games. The types of human trafficking: it's forced labor, forced child labor, bonded labor, debt bondage, actual sex trafficking, child soldiers, and sale of body parts. Forced labor: any work relation in which women or people in general are employed against their own will, with the threat of destitution, detention, violence, including death, or other forms of extreme hardship to themselves and their family members. Forced child labor is employment below the minimum age as established in national legislation, hazardous unpaid household services. So examples of that would be like sweatshops and farm workers. They're paid little to nothing. A lot of times you have children as young as 11 that are working in these sweatshops, and that are working in the farms, and they really get paid little to nothing. Debt and bonded labor: it's an abuse to slavery in which individuals are pledged to work either for a moneylender or a landlord to repay a debt or a loan. It applies to children who work either for a moneylender or a landowner to pay off debts for family members. So sometimes landlords, if a person can't afford to pay their rent, they'll have the children do something around their home or outside, and instead of paying the children or paying the adult for the work that they're doing, that's just them repaying them for not being able to pay their rent. That's debt and bonded labor, and they may attempt to cause harm if it's not done. Child soldiers. So child soldiers are boys and girls who are often abducted and used as combatants, forced to act as human shields or conduct executions. And the boys oftentimes are deployed as suicide bombers or used to make or transport explosives. I think, we've seen enough even now. I won't go into, what's going on right now with the war, but I think, and even in movies, we've seen, these children acting as soldiers, being used as human shields. And it's not just in the movies, it's a real thing that in other countries, that they actually have children as being used as soldiers. Girls are used as cooks, messengers, sex slaves, and soldiers, young as 8. Most children were recruited from West and Central Africa and Somalia. Sex trafficking. So sex trafficking is actually the recruitment, the harboring, transportation, provision, patronizing, soliciting, or practice of a person for the purpose of a sexual commercial act that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Again, it has to involve those 3 things to let people know that it's not consensual when it involves those 3, in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years old. So an example of sex trafficking is a mother allows her drug dealer boyfriend to engage in sexual acts with her 6-year-old son or daughter in exchange for drugs. A 15-year-old girl exchanges sex for a free ride from an Uber or a rideshare driver. Fake massage parlors, it happens. Types of human trafficking continued. We have smuggling versus human trafficking, domestic minor sex trafficking, commercial sex act. So smuggling versus human trafficking. So smuggling is the illegal movement of a person across a border with his or her consent. However, in human trafficking, there is no consent given by the victim. So I want to be clear on that. So smuggling is the illegal movement of a person across a border with his or her consent. Human trafficking, there is no consent given by the victim. So the difference in the two is that there is consent given in smuggling. In human trafficking, there is no consent. Most people who are smuggled often are trafficked, though. Domestic minor trafficking is defined by federal law. It occurs when someone under the age of 18 is trafficked for sex. A commercial sex act is the giving or receiving of anything of value, whether it's money, shelter, food, or clothes, to any person in exchange for a sex act. For example, prostitution, pornography, exotic dancing, and stripping. According to the Department of Education, children who are victims of human trafficking are usually used for commercial use. On the average, there are about 100,000 children trafficked each year who are under the age of 12. Again, on average, there are about 100,000 children trafficked each year who are under the age of 12. Child victims can experience effects from trafficking the rest of their lives. So a lot of the survivors that I've worked with, range from 11 to 20. And even at 20, it's something that, because it was so horrific, is just something that obviously they'll never forget. And it comes up from time to time. But the older individuals are able to help the younger generation. But it's just a very traumatic experience that you never want to experience, whether it's with your child or anyone that you know. Touching on Love 146, so I kind of talked about that in the beginning, but Love 146 was founded in 2002 when the co-founder Rob Morris, Lamont Hebert, and Desiree Rogers, Caroline Ham, they went on a trip to Southeast Asia to see how they could help combat child trafficking. Love 146 vision is to end the child trafficking and exploitation, nothing less. They believe that this is only possible through a bold, broad vision that cannot be achieved by only one person, organization, perspective, or approach. And as I said earlier, human trafficking can happen to anyone. It's not a normal conversation that we just like to have. It's a very uncomfortable conversation. It makes you uneasy. It's one of those conversations, where you grow up in a household and they tell you this is not something that we talk about outside of the home if it happened. But in times today, with everything going on, this is not the time to kind of turn a blind eye or mind your business if you know something's happening to a child. Adults, they kind of have a little bit more control of their lives, but children don't have that control. So I think it's important that we continue to have these uncomfortable conversations, because if we don't, we can say what's wrong, what's right, all we want till we're blue in the face, but all we're doing is talking. So what are we actually doing with these conversations? Where are we going with these conversations? I'm not sure who's tuning in and where you're from, what state, but go to your legislators and try to get more programs, that cover prevention of sex trafficking in your schools, in your place of business, to start having those conversations, because it's happening. It's not just happening in one place. It's happening all over the world, and it just continuously getting brushed under the rug. But as it says here, it is one person. I can't do this by myself. The next person can't do it by themselves. We have to collectively be on the same page. And I think that's where the issues are happening, is that we're not on the same page. We're uncomfortable. We don't want those issues in our life. We don't want the heat brought to us. But we have to continue to, make awareness of what's happening around us. So in Connecticut, there was a hotel mandate the state legislature passed in 2016, where it mandates all the hotel and lodging employees, they receive training in human trafficking. It's the first law in the United States of its kind that happened in Connecticut. So on like the Berlin Turnpike, if you're familiar with Connecticut, there's a lot of hotels where predators take their victims because it's an easy location, is right off the highway. They take their victims to these hotels, and because that was happening so much, the state of Connecticut mandated the hotels to have these employees take the training so that they can be made aware of certain signs to look for if a child was being brought there, or a young woman was being brought there and they were being trafficked. The training mandate was proposed employees to find non-compliant operators of hotels, motels, and other lodging businesses. The revenue would have gone towards the police investigations of human trafficking. Again, it would have gone to, that's the key word, but the state could not find the capacity to carry out the enforcement. And so the final version of that bill was omitted because there was no enforcement mechanism, unfortunately. The Connecticut anti-trafficking law is the law that allows the court to impose a standing criminal protective order against anyone who commits trafficking in person and the victim is under the age of 18. This person can receive up to 25 years and fines up to 20,000, or they can receive both, depending on, the actual crime. What are the legal rights of a human trafficking victim in Connecticut? So if a victim of a trafficking is accused of prostitution, they possess a legal reason why they should not be held liable for the charges based on affirmative defense. A victim can also assert the defense of duress to a prostitution charge in certain situations. If a 16 or 17-year-old is charged with prostitution, it is assumed that the offender of human trafficking coerced them into search work. And again, it involves coercion. That person did not consent to it. And at 16 or 17, legally, you can't consent. A police officer who arrests a 16 or 17-year-old prostitute arrests a 16 or 17-year-old on prostitution charges is required to report suspected child abuse to the Department of Children and Families. So if a 16 or 17-year-old is arrested for prostitution, the police officer is required to report that to the Department of Children and Families because they are under 18. Percentages in Connecticut. So more than 60% of sex trafficking victims live with their parents. So what does that mean? So again, as parents, we strive to give our child, the best life, and would hope that if anything was happening to them, that they would be comfortable coming to talk to us about it. But again, they are exposed to their environment. They are exposed to different people, whether they're in school, at work. So we don't really know what's going on behind those doors while we're at work, or while we're wherever we're at, and they're wherever they're at. So we don't know the peer pressure that happens, the conversations that they're having, the predators that, are coming at them on social media. Children just don't feel comfortable talking about it. So when it says that they live with their parents, it could be any one of our children. We don't know. And that's the unfortunate part. So that's why I encourage, parents to have those uncomfortable conversations with our children. When you start noticing certain behaviors that they were not expressing to you before, and you're starting to notice certain changes, ask them what's going on. Has anything changed? Are they having problems in school? Are they having problems with their friends? Because that little conversation, you kind of open the door to get them to start to feel comfortable. But if we just feel like, oh, that's just them today, we don't really pay much attention. We really won't know. And that's kind of how it starts to happen, is that stuff is happening outside of the norm, and we don't see it. The exact number of child victims is unknown and likely to be significantly higher than the reported rate, given that it continues to be difficult to identify victims due to lack of self-identification, hidden nature of human trafficking, and the use of internet, according to the Human Trafficking Report by DCF. In 2021, the Department of Family and Children received 241 reports of child trafficking in Connecticut. Since its inception in 2007, the Human Trafficking Hotline has identified 508 human trafficking cases involving Connecticut victims. So, DCF received 241 reports of child trafficking in Connecticut in 2021. The Trafficking Hotline has identified 508 involving Connecticut victims. So there's a big gap in between, what's being reported. That's the big difference, is that it's happening, but it's not being reported, and that's the problem. Age of victims between, children, boys and girls. According to the Department of Children and Families, DCF, out of the 241 victims of child trafficking in 2021, 80%, 6% of them were female, and 67% lived with a parent or a guardian. 86% were female, and 67% lived with a parent or a guardian. The average age of exploitation is between the ages of 12 to 15 years old in the US. If the victim is a minor, no force, fraud, or coercion is necessary to prove trafficking. Over 50% of identified, and I bolded identified because, again, it's not being reported, but over 50% of identified girl victims are aged between 15 and 17, whereas about 40% of trafficked boys are under 12 years of age. Where do most trafficked girls come from? The largest number of people trafficked in the United States come from East Asia and the Pacific, 5,000 to 7,000 victims. Employment opportunities, lack of control over financial resources, and limited access to education are all factors that can exacerbate the being vulnerable of women and girls to trafficking. So East Asia and the Pacific is not a fairly wealthy country. So predators know that, that they're lacking money, they're lacking resources. So in return or in exchange for a better life, they traffic these young girls and promise them to give them a better life for them and their family. But what they actually do is they take them from their family and they bring them over here. And that's where you see them most likely in the massage parlors and the sweatshops, the farm workers. That's the type of work that you kind of see them doing mostly. Do older women get trafficked? So it's called benefits trafficking. So this is an emerging crime that targets older adults and adults with disabilities for the purpose of gaining access to their monthly benefits and or life savings. So Georgia is the first state to legislate this crime and has worked to spread awareness across the state and country on this matter. So in the state of Georgia, it's becoming more prevalent, unfortunately, where predators are taking advantage of older women, knowing that they get Social Security and other benefits, and they've been kind of soliciting older women into giving them their benefits or threatening them if they don't do certain things. If they don't give them certain things, they will cause harm. And it's been pretty big in Georgia. So Georgia is the first state to actually legislate it as a crime, and it's called benefits trafficking. The education level of children. So almost half of identified child victims of trafficking have completed primary or elementary education. Almost a quarter have attended middle school, while only 2% have completed secondary school. Over 10% have no education at all. The average duration of trafficking for adult victims is close to 2 years, while the average length for child victims is slightly higher at 2.2 years. So that says a lot about the education. Again, a lot of youth, a lot of the women, they're not completing school, so they don't have any education. They don't have any resources, so they kind of feel forced to, be in the lifestyle that they're put in. Federal laws and initiatives. So in 2000, the United States passed its first comprehensive federal law to address human trafficking, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, known as TVPA, which provided the three-pronged approach that states later modeled. Congress reauthorized it in 2003, 2005, 2008, and 2013. Additionally, in 2014, Congress passed the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act, which addressed protection of children and youth at risk of sex trafficking. And in 2015, it passed the Justice for Victims of Trafficking, which provides restitution for human trafficking victims. Although there have been other federal initiatives on this topic, these are the major pieces of federal legislation that addresses domestic human trafficking. Finally, the federal government also funds a national human trafficking hotline, which you'll receive at the end of this presentation. Are there any states that have no anti-trafficking laws? So as of right now, all 50 states and DC have passed anti-trafficking laws. However, not all laws are created equal. The Polaris Project dubs Wyoming, Arkansas, Montana, and South Dakota as the faltering four, because these are the states that have the weakest anti-trafficking laws. The Polaris Project, what is that? So it's named after the North Star and the historical symbol of freedom. The Polaris is a leading survivor-centered justice and equity-driven movement to end human trafficking since 2007. Polaris has operated the U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline, connecting victims and survivors to support and services and helping communities hold traffickers accountable. Through that work, Polaris has built the largest known database on human trafficking in North America. This data and expertise gained from 2 decades of working on trafficking situations in real time informs strategies that hold traffickers accountable, support survivors on their healing journeys, and addresses the vulnerabilities that enable the business of stealing freedom for profit. What are the top 10 states for child trafficking? So the 10 worst states for human trafficking are currently California, Texas, Florida, New York, Michigan, Ohio, Georgia, Illinois, Missouri, and Mississippi. Of sex trafficking victims in California, 76% were females, 3.9 were males, and 26.9 were minors. Additionally, over 14,000 calls were made in 2018 regarding human trafficking and smuggling cases in California. And keep in mind, California is right next to the border, so Washington. In 2003, Washington became the first state to criminalize human trafficking. Since then, every state has enacted laws establishing criminal penalties for traffickers seeking to profit from forced labor or sexual servitude. What do child traffickers look for and how do they pick their victims? So traffickers, as I spoke about a little earlier, they often look for women and children who are desperate and in need of money. They might also target lonely individuals who are more likely to trust strangers and be influenced by them. So predators look for weaknesses, and weaknesses doesn't necessarily mean not having money, but when predators look for weaknesses, in youth specifically, they look for youth that come from broken homes or one parent home households where they know a child is home alone. One parent is, working 5 jobs, 3 jobs, trying to make ends meet, or let's say a child does live at home with both parents, but there's always issues. There's always something going on in the household, and they never want to be at home, and they express that to these predators. Those predators take advantage of that and make them feel, like, oh, I can make you feel better, or you act like such an adult. The child could be 13 and they're telling them, oh, you're such an adult, you take care of yourself, you do this alone, you do this by yourself. Make them feel kind of good about themselves for being who they are, but it's really like a mind game. So they prey on those weaknesses, and they continuously do that. So one of the most effective ways traffickers recruit victims is by making false promises. They may offer romantic involvement or a job opportunity. In those job opportunities, they may word it to where a child might not know exactly what they're going to be getting into until they get there, like a strip club, or exchanging sexual acts for money. They won't know what's happening until they actually get to the location to where they're going. So they may give the person a feeling of security, giving them hope for a better future. Signs to look for. Some red flags to look for in children are multiple cell phones, new hairstyles, manicures, or tattoos. So when I used to work in the juvenile detention center, there were a few the same girls that were in and out, in and out, in and out. And every time they would come in, sometimes they would have their hair color would be different hairstyle. And I would ask them, because of the time frame that they were coming in, it was like almost twice a month, 3 times a month. And every time they would come in, like I said, they would have like their hair is different. Something about them is different. And that's how I learned that, they were being trained, and they were being kind of forced to change their look to look older and appealing to older men. So some of the red flags, again, is new hairstyles, manicures, tattoos, appearing malnourished. So sometimes instead of being treated well and lavishly, they may be not treated well at all, not being fed. Showing signs of physical injuries and abuse. The black eyes, the bruised arms, the bruised all around their neck, very timid, very frigid. Just those some of the things to pay attention to. Avoiding eye contact, social interaction, authority figures, and law enforcement. Seeming to adhere to scripted or rehearsed responses in social interactions. So sometimes you might have conversations with youth and it's almost like their response is scripted. It's like it just sounds not the norm of a conversation you would have with someone. It just doesn't sound like them. Lacking official identification documents. So a child that's at least 15, 16 should have like a state ID, or 15, 16, 17 should have a state ID. If they don't have certain documents, that could be a clear sign that, they are trafficked. They're not here legally. So this is the hotline information. So if you or someone you know is a victim of trafficking, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The National Human Trafficking Hotline maintains one of the most extensive data sets on the issue of human trafficking and in the United States. The statistics contained on this website are based on aggregated information learned through signals, phone calls, texts online, chats, emails, and online tip reports received by the trafficking hotline. The data does not define the totality of human trafficking or a trafficking network in any given area. The trafficking hotline uses this data to help human trafficking victims and survivors and to provide the anti-trafficking field with information to help combat all forms of human trafficking. And here is the Love 146 information. I'll leave this here. I'll go back to the hotline just in case anyone wanted it. Give you a minute. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat here. I could see them. I'll be more than willing to answer those.
Hi, Taisha. Thank you so much for shining a light on this important topic and bringing out what, some people may think, oh, this only happens in other countries, and knowing that it happens right here under under our noses. And there are a few questions in the chat, and we did drop the hotline number and the Love 146 website in the chat for people to grab.
Okay.
So
I do see you, Ms. Garcia. Which state in the U.S. has the highest reports? As of right now, it's California. I'll go back to that slide. I think I actually
sorry.
touched
Go
on
ahead.
it. Okay. So the worst 10 states for human trafficking are California, Texas, Florida, New York, Michigan, Ohio, Georgia, Illinois, Missouri, and Mississippi. Of sex trafficking victims in California, 76% of them were females, and 3.9% of them were males. 26.9% were minors. Additionally, over 14,000 calls were made in 2018 regarding human trafficking and smuggling cases in California. So those are the top 10 states, but California seems to have a higher percentage regarding females with human trafficking. What happens to victims after the 2.2 years? So let me go back here. So because of the lack of the education that I spoke about here, sometimes it continues. Those youth, unless they are part of some sort of reintegration program or adult integration programs, is pretty much they continue that lifestyle. They continue to engage in harmful, unhealthy lifestyles as youth. They kind of stay in that environment. They may not necessarily continue to be trafficked or prostituted, but they continue to just engage in unhealthy behaviors, whether that's just hanging with the wrong crowd, being in the wrong environment, unless someone catches them right at that time.
Yeah, it helps them. Is there any statistics that show for the youth that do not have an intervention where they're helped at that point, that it leads to homelessness, drug addiction? Just, is that sort of what you're implying? Is that a lot of these youth end up in just a lifestyle that's pretty lost?
Detrimental, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And then that turns into adulthood, and they're still in that time frame. Do you find that some of the victims? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you find that some of the victims go back to their traffickers after being rescued? Stockholm, any statistics on that? I don't currently have this statistics on that, Ms. Garcia. I can get that for you though. But Stockholm is a very I'm not sure if everyone's aware of that, but Stockholm is pretty much when the person that victimized the victim is like they want nothing more than to be with that victim, regardless of what has happened to them. Like a parent that abuses their child, the child wants nothing more than that parent's love, even though that is the parent that abused them. That's what Stockholm syndrome is. Yes, I do find victims sometimes do go back, especially the younger, not necessarily the older adults. I should say young adults, like in 20s, but obviously, like 12 to 15. Some of them that have come out of it, it is harder for them, unfortunately, to trust the people that are trying to help them, because we're not providing them a lifestyle that they were used to. And they enjoy that lifestyle because these predators do give them, sometimes they tell them, I'm going to change your life. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you that. And they do give them that. They do provide that lifestyle. So when a child is taken from that, and that's all that they know, it's hard to kind of come out of that. So they do sometimes go back. And that is the unfortunate part. You're welcome.
Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do in the schools? Like, is there any kind of program that in the school systems that addresses this, so youth and parents are aware, and I guess staff, because they could be an intervention if they're noticing some of the signs that you had discussed.
Yes. So currently, the Love 146, I utilize that Love 146 curriculum. There's not all schools are privy to it, and not all schools are comfortable with it. So those are conversations that I would have to have, and I have had with like administration, and that's how I have gotten to be able to go into the schools and facilitate these groups. It is a very intense program, but you wouldn't believe, like we've kind of gone through this presentation, you see how young it can start. And it has started at such a young age, as young as 9. So it is it's hard to address certain things with a 9-year-old compared to talking to a 18-year-old. Those are the uncomfortable conversations that I am having in the schools. But again, a lot of schools are not comfortable with bringing that into, and they are to the students, but the schools that are, I wouldn't say comfortable, but are open to the curriculum, they have noticed some changes, and they notice how helpful it has been in allowing these students to open up and talk about certain things, just even to begin to kind of crack that door, whereas before they would never talk about it.
Yeah, I would think it would be something that they'd want to bring this awareness. So like you had talked about, so the youth know about it, so the parents can be aware,
Yeah.
because I'm sure most parents aren't thinking their 9-year-old is engaging in any kind of conversations with adults and things like that. So it would be nice if there were some sort of effort that would really bring this into communities and into the schools, so that that awareness can be opened up to everyone.
And that was one of the things that I brought to the administration, was finding out about Roblox, because I had never heard of it until one of the youth actually brought it to me and told me how predators are using that platform to solicit children through that game. So I had to make the school aware, like stuff like that. I would have never known.
Right.
My daughter's older, so she's not 9. So
So someone is asking if this information is expanding to Mass and other states. I would imagine, is Lump 146, it's a national organization, correct?
oh yes, have you thought about exploring? Hi, Dee Dee. Have you thought about exploring and expanding to neighborhood states like Massachusetts to bring? Absolutely, absolutely. I am willing to explore anywhere that is open to bringing light to this awareness and shining light on how traumatic this is and has been to our children.
And within the presentations you do within the schools, are there, tips as far as, I mean, because I know, like you said, online, so many youth, that's their whole world, and
Yes.
they think they know they can trust people, and yet that is one of the ways that you discuss that traffickers really lure people in. Is there anything that can be shared with the youth that could give them some sense of protection of how to really vet when someone is, approaching them through the internet?
I'm not necessarily vet them, but the unfortunate part about it is that as parents first, right? We could talk to our children about online safety and how predators are paying attention to pictures that they're posting, things that they're saying, and they're using that against them. Sometimes, though, they're developing these relationships, whether it's friendships with people that they think are someone else. They've developed this relationship because they're constantly talking, not necessarily seeing the person, but having these conversations and going to this person in time of need when they're feeling vulnerable or something happened at home or something happened at school and they don't want to talk to mom and dad about, then go to this person. So by now they've developed this relationship and they trust this person. So it's kind of hard to kind of then go in and tell them you can't trust people online when they've already developed that. But all we can do as teachers is continue to talk about the dangers of online, or predators being online, and how certain things shouldn't be shared. And then in high schools and the middle schools, you get into the sexting and you get into these teenagers sending pictures, unfortunately inappropriate pictures, nude, to people that they trust, until they're friends, and then these pictures are then exposed online on social media, and it's rotated. So they're at the youth are kind of, it's a retaliatory mechanism that they're doing to themselves. It's honestly, and a lot of things that I've seen, it's the youth themselves that are kind of exposing themselves to social media.
Right. But I think, bringing this awareness would be a good step too. At least they're aware that that there are predators out there and that they are sneaky in the way that they gain their trust and all. So I would think
that, yes,
as many presentations as you can do and
definitely
organizations can do to bring
yes,
this awareness would be
definitely
a positive step in the right direction.
Yes.
But thank you so much for bringing this presentation to our Week Without Violence. I think
thank you for having me.
It's so helpful to just get that awareness out there. Like we were saying earlier, I think sometimes it's something that's uncomfortable to talk about and people don't want to, but it really can't hide in the shadows. It really has to be brought out so that more people are aware of it. And I think that awareness gives some protection.
And I just want to hone in on one last thing, is that a lot of times we as parents, we tend to say, like I that couldn't be me, or that couldn't be my child, because we strive so much on providing a good life to our kids. But the thing is that our children, no matter where they are, they're exposed to risk factors. They're exposed to certain environments that once they leave home, we have no control over. So it comes back to just having those conversations so that they are aware of things that could happen and how to kind of handle themselves in certain situations. And that's not to say that we're bad parents because certain things have happened, but we can be better parents when we become comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations, because it starts at home.
Yes. Yeah. That's
so I just wanted to kind of hone in on that.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good way to wrap it up, is that the awareness and just having those difficult conversations.
Yes.
So thank you again so much for bringing this awareness.
Yes.
To our audience. And thank you. I'm going to put up a slide that has some resources, and you can always reach out. We dropped a lot of the links to the organizations that Taisha spoke of. So if you want to reach out, or someone who needs some of this information, you can provide it to them. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. I was a little anxious, but
I think it went well, and we had some great questions. So thank you to the audience for bringing their questions in. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.